Some people grip life so tightly it slips away. They plan every detail, correcting what was never broken. From a distance, it looks disciplined, admirable, controlled. Up close, something quieter feels strained and brittle. The effort feels familiar, almost uncomfortably personal. What appears strong may hide an older fear. Beneath precision, a deeper instinct quietly tightens. Trying too hard is often praised as dedication, as ambition refined into relentless effort. Yet beneath the surface, it frequently signals a nervous system that does not trust the present moment. Overcontrol is not intensity alone. It is intensity fused with vigilance, a subtle scanning for error, rejection, instability, as though catastrophe waits behind minor imperfection. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that what we present as virtue can mask compensation. An excessive discipline sometimes compensates for an inner expectation of chaos. In a meeting, someone rehearses sentences silently before speaking, adjusts tone carefully, monitors reactions across the table, their shoulders slightly elevated as if bracing for impact. The presentation is flawless, the data precise, yet their breathing never fully settles, because performance has become protection rather than expression. At a dinner with friends, a person insists on choosing the restaurant, coordinating timing, confirming reservations twice, smiling while subtly steering every variable toward predictability. Nothing overtly dramatic happens, yet the evening feels managed rather than shared, as if spontaneity itself poses a quiet threat. Overcontrol often masquerades as responsibility, but responsibility alone does not tighten the jaw or interrupt sleep over minor uncertainties. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that the human brain prioritizes threat detection over comfort, and some individuals adapt by attempting to eliminate uncertainty altogether. This adaptation can look impressive: high standards, punctuality, structured routines, carefully curated identities. But the driving force is not excellence, it is prevention. A parent hovers near a child assembling a puzzle, offering corrections before mistakes fully form, hands half extended, eyes alert to potential frustration. The child hesitates more with each move, sensing that errors carry weight, learning that precision equals safety, absorbing vigilance as atmosphere. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that reinforced behaviors persist, and when control once prevented embarrassment or conflict, the mind records it as survival strategy. The pattern strengthens quietly, not because it brings joy, but because it once reduced pain. In romantic relationships, one partner analyzes every shift in tone, replays conversations internally, drafts careful responses designed to avoid misinterpretation. Affection becomes calibrated, disagreements preemptively softened, vulnerability filtered through layers of anticipated reaction. To outsiders, this appears considerate and emotionally intelligent, yet internally it feels like navigating a field scattered with invisible tripwires. Overcontrol is rarely loud. It does not shout or dominate overtly. Instead, it refines, edits, optimizes, until life resembles a controlled experiment. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described the human need for meaning under pressure, and sometimes control itself becomes the meaning that wards off existential uncertainty. A student studies long after comprehension fades, rewriting notes repeatedly, reorganizing highlights, convinced that one overlooked detail could unravel everything. The grades remain high, the praise consistent, yet satisfaction never arrives, because the goal was never mastery, it was relief. Relief from what is often unclear, a diffuse tension, a background hum suggesting that loosening grip invites loss. The label "trying too hard" describes a behavioral pattern, not a flawed individual. It reflects a nervous system trained to equate effort with survival. In workplaces, such individuals volunteer for extra tasks, double-check colleagues' work, correct small inconsistencies before anyone notices. They are valued, sometimes promoted, yet internally they rarely feel secure, because worth seems conditional upon perpetual adjustment. Control and moderation organizes life, but when it becomes constant, it narrows experience, filtering out unpredictability along with possibility. Even leisure becomes structured, vacations scheduled down to the hour, relaxation turned into another performance metric. Friends may joke about their intensity, describing them as perfectionists or high achievers. unaware that beneath competence lies continuous monitoring. This monitoring is exhausting, yet relinquishing it feels dangerous, as though vigilance alone keeps hidden collapse at bay. The paradox begins to surface quietly. The harder one tries to secure outcomes, the more fragile those outcomes feel. And beneath this fragility, an earlier chapter waits, shaping the need to control long before adulthood ever began. If you're still watching, you probably notice things most people miss. You question behavior. You look beneath the surface. If that sounds like you, subscribe. This channel was made for minds like yours. Long before achievement, the nervous system was listening. Overcontrol rarely begins in boardrooms or adult relationships. It often takes root in childhood environments where unpredictability felt overwhelming or subtly unsafe. A child sits at a kitchen table, watching two adults argue in low, controlled voices, absorbing tension that never fully resolves, learning to anticipate shifts in tone. Homework becomes immaculate, toys arranged symmetrically, shoes aligned perfectly near the door, small rituals forming against a backdrop of emotional instability. No one names this adaptation, yet the child senses that mistakes increase friction while precision reduces it, and the body quietly chooses precision. Attachment researchers have long observed that inconsistent caregiving sharpens vigilance, the young brain scanning for microsignals to predict approval or withdrawal. When affection feels conditional, performance becomes currency, and competence transforms into a shield against relational loss. In another home, silence replaces conflict, emotions unspoken yet heavy, leaving a child to interpret subtle cues like changes in breathing or posture. The child learns to preempt disappointment, finishing chores before reminders, suppressing impulses that might disturb the fragile calm. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that humans evolved in environments where social exclusion threatened survival, making sensitivity to rejection deeply embedded in our biology. For some, this sensitivity intensifies, pairing with early experiences that equate error with emotional distance, embedding control as protective reflex. Psychologist Alfred Adler wrote about striving as compensation, and in certain developmental contexts, striving becomes not aspiration but stabilization. A young student receives praise primarily when excelling, smiles widening only after high scores, warmth subtly tethered to performance. The association forms quietly. Achievement equals connection, imperfection equals subtle withdrawal, and the nervous system encodes the pattern. Over time, the child internalizes an invisible contract: remain exceptional, remain vigilant, remain safe. In households where chaos erupts unpredictably, children sometimes assume the role of mediator, anticipating needs before they are expressed. They monitor siblings' moods, soften parents' frustration, organize routines with surprising maturity, praised as responsible beyond their years. Responsibility here is not purely virtue. It is adaptation, a strategy to stabilize a volatile emotional climate. Neuroscience suggests that repeated stress sensitizes threat detection systems, strengthening neural pathways associated with anticipation and control. Thus, the brain becomes efficient at forecasting potential problems, but less practiced in tolerating uncertainty without intervention. In adolescence, social hierarchies intensify, and the previously vigilant child refines image management, curating identity to avoid ridicule or exclusion. Clothing choices calculated, opinions moderated, humor carefully timed, each decision filtered through imagined audience reaction. Peers may interpret this as confidence or meticulousness, yet internally it is ongoing risk assessment. Carl Jung observed that the persona develops to navigate society, and in overcontrol the persona becomes heavily fortified, leaving little room for spontaneity. The original fear may no longer be conscious, yet the body still reacts to ambiguity as if it signals relational threat. In early workplaces, supervisors praise reliability, reinforcing the old contract that safety follows flawless execution. Each compliment strengthens the neural link between control and belonging, making relaxation feel like exposure. Even success can amplify anxiety because higher visibility increases perceived stakes, and the old survival circuitry remains active. The individual may not recall specific moments of formative tension, yet their habits reveal an early lesson etched deeply. That lesson whispers that loosening control invites instability, that effort must remain constant to preserve connection. What began as intelligent adaptation gradually crystallizes into identity, rarely questioned because it appears functional. Yet when this pattern enters adult social worlds, it acquires new consequences, shaping interactions in ways others notice before the individual does. It is easier to see in someone else first. In friendships, overcontrol often appears as reliability taken slightly too far, plans confirmed repeatedly, contingencies prepared for events that have not occurred. A group prepares for a weekend trip. One person circulates detailed itineraries, backup routes, weather projections, and emergency contacts, smiling while scanning for approval. The others appreciate the organization, yet gradually defer decisions, sensing that improvisation will be quietly corrected. Control subtly redistributes power, not through dominance, but through constant adjustment that leaves little space for shared unpredictability. In romantic relationships, the pattern shifts tone, becoming attentiveness that borders on hypervigilance, affection measured carefully against perceived fluctuations in mood. After a minor disagreement, one partner drafts long, thoughtful messages, analyzing each word for potential misunderstanding, rereading before sending. The intention is harmony, yet the underlying signal is fear of rupture, as though conflict itself threatens permanence. Over time, the other partner may feel observed rather than met, their spontaneous reactions gently reorganized into safer formats. Family gatherings reveal another layer, where the over-controlling individual manages conversations away from sensitive topics, smoothing tension before it surfaces. A sibling begins recounting a controversial opinion, and the mediator quickly reframes it with humor, diffusing potential discord. Everyone feels temporarily relieved, yet something authentic remains unspoken, quietly accumulating beneath managed calm. In professional settings, overcontrol often wins admiration, deadlines met early, projects refined beyond requirement, risks minimized before presentation. A colleague hesitates to propose a novel idea, knowing it will be dissected for weaknesses before it fully breathes. Innovation narrows, not because creativity lacks value, but because unpredictability triggers subtle alarm. Behavioral research suggests that groups unconsciously adapt to the most vigilant member, calibrating behavior around perceived thresholds of error. Thus, overcontrol reshapes social ecosystems, encouraging caution, dampening spontaneity, stabilizing at the cost of aliveness. At social events, the individual scans micro-expressions, interpreting brief silences as dissatisfaction, laughter as approval metrics. They adjust posture, tone, anecdotes, modulating presence in real time, a continuous internal negotiation rarely visible externally. Friends may describe them as composed, mature, impressively self-aware, unaware that composure here is sustained by constant internal monitoring. In positions of authority, overcontrol can harden into micromanagement, instructions detailed meticulously, trust extended cautiously. An employee completes a task successfully, yet receives revisions for minor stylistic differences, the leader unable to tolerate variance. The organization functions efficiently, yet morale thins, creativity contracts, and subtle resentment accumulates. Power combined with overcontrol intensifies the dynamic, because influence amplifies the reach of vigilance. Psychologist Horney wrote about moving toward others to secure safety, and overcontrol often represents a refined version of that movement. By managing impressions and outcomes, the individual attempts to secure belonging, reducing relational ambiguity through structure. Yet relationships depend partly on unpredictability, shared vulnerability, and unscripted reactions that cannot be optimized. When every interaction is filtered, others may sense distance, an invisible barrier constructed from caution. Ironically, the effort to preserve connection can erode intimacy, because authenticity feels risky within a tightly regulated persona. Observers notice tension in the shoulders, the quick correction, the inability to leave silence unfilled. They may label it perfectionism or intensity, not recognizing the older survival circuitry driving it. Midway through adult life, some begin to sense fatigue, not from work alone, but from constant self-supervision. The realization surfaces quietly that relationships feel safer yet strangely constrained. And beyond these social patterns, a wider cultural landscape quietly rewards the very vigilance that exhausts them. Modern life rarely tells the vigilant to rest. Digital platforms reward precision, constant responsiveness, curated identity, metrics displayed publicly as subtle scorecards of relevance and worth. A professional refreshes an email inbox repeatedly, crafting replies that balance warmth and authority, aware that written tone can be endlessly reinterpreted. The send button feels less like communication and more like exposure, as if each message enters permanent record. Social media intensifies this pattern, encouraging controlled self-presentation, photographs edited, captions refined, reactions monitored in real time. A post remains open on a screen, its author checking engagement statistics, adjusting future expression based on numerical feedback. Approval becomes quantified, disapproval amplified, and ambiguity magnified by algorithmic visibility. Cultural narratives celebrate optimization, productivity tracked by applications, sleep cycles analyzed, habits measured against ideal benchmarks. Rest transforms into data point, leisure evaluated for efficiency, even meditation performed with performance metrics in mind. The language of hustle normalizes chronic effort, blurring the boundary between dedication and compulsion. In competitive industries, availability becomes currency, late-night responses signaling commitment, boundaries quietly eroding under expectation. An employee answers messages during dinner, phone face down yet vibrating, attention split between presence and potential demand. Family members sense divided focus, though no explicit conflict arises, the device quietly dictating rhythm. Economic instability further fuels vigilance, markets fluctuating, careers shifting rapidly, reinforcing the belief that control must intensify to prevent decline. Evolutionary instincts meet digital acceleration, creating a feedback loop where threat detection rarely powers down. Psychologist Eric Fromm described modern freedom as both opportunity and burden, and overcontrol often emerges as an attempt to manage overwhelming choice. With endless options available, individuals scrutinize decisions meticulously, fearing that suboptimal choices carry irreversible consequences. Streaming platforms offer thousands of selections, yet someone scrolls endlessly, unwilling to commit, wary of wasting limited time. Even minor preferences become weighted, as if each decision reveals character or competence. Workplace software tracks productivity invisibly, keystrokes measured, performance dashboards updated automatically, fostering subtle self-surveillance. The individual internalizes this gaze, auditing their own output before external review occurs. Control shifts from interpersonal necessity to ambient expectation, woven into infrastructure rather than imposed explicitly. Consumer culture markets improvement relentlessly, self-enhancement framed as moral responsibility, imperfections positioned as solvable flaws. A fitness tracker vibrates to indicate inactivity, prompting movement not from desire, but from algorithmic reminder. The body becomes project, optimized for output, subtly reinforcing the belief that value depends on measurable refinement. Hidden psychological costs accumulate, chronic tension, difficulty tolerating stillness, diminished capacity for unstructured presence. Sleep may arrive later, thoughts rehearsing unfinished tasks, potential missteps replayed under dim light. Friends comment on accomplishments, unaware of the constant internal audit running beneath visible success. Overcontrol in this environment appears rational, even adaptive, because unpredictability genuinely exists at scale. Yet the nervous system cannot distinguish between digital metrics and ancestral threat, responding to notifications with the same physiological readiness. The result is a culture of composed exteriors masking persistent activation, effort normalized to the point of invisibility. Beneath efficiency and curated competence, something more fragile strains quietly. And noticing that strain requires a different kind of awareness, one that does not immediately attempt to correct what it sees. Eventually, the strain becomes faintly audible, not as breakdown or spectacle, but as subtle thinning of experience, moments passing efficiently yet leaving little imprint. Overcontrol narrows perception, prioritizing error detection over sensation, outcome over presence, anticipation over immersion. A person walks through a park while mentally organizing tomorrow's schedule, adjusting imagined conversations, refining plans that may never unfold. The trees register as background, the air unnoticed, because attention is allocated to managing potential futures. Psychologist Rollo May wrote about the courage to be, and overcontrol often replaces being with constant calibration. Calibration feels safer than surrender, yet it creates distance from immediate aliveness. In quiet evenings, some feel restless without clear reason, as though silence exposes something long contained. Television plays softly, phone scrolling continues, minor tasks invented to avoid the unstructured space where vigilance lacks target. Stillness reveals the machinery, the scanning, the anticipation, the subtle bracing against undefined loss. Over years, identity fuses with capability, self-described primarily through roles performed competently. When praise arrives, it lands briefly, unable to penetrate the deeper assumption that effort must continue uninterrupted. A celebration occurs for a completed milestone, applause warm and genuine, yet internally attention shifts immediately to the next objective. Satisfaction flickers, quickly replaced by renewed calculation of what might go wrong next. The body carries this history, shoulders slightly raised, jaw set unconsciously, breath shallow during ordinary exchanges. Medical checkups may show elevated stress markers, though no dramatic crisis explains their persistence. Friends occasionally remark on intensity, suggesting relaxation lightly, unaware that relaxing feels equivalent to exposure. Because beneath control lies an old equation: vigilance equals safety, effort equals belonging. Even when environments change, the equation persists, encoded not as thought, but as reflex. Carl Jung observed that what remains unconscious directs us, and overcontrol often operates below deliberate awareness. It shapes posture, tone, scheduling, relational boundaries, choices framed as preference but driven by unease. A partner expresses desire for spontaneity, a weekend without plans, and anxiety surfaces disproportionate to the request. The discomfort is not about logistics alone. It touches the deeper layer where unpredictability once signaled threat. Thus, the individual may comply externally while internally constructing contingency frameworks, unable to rest within open space. Overcontrol succeeds in preventing certain failures, yet it also prevents certain experiences, though this cost is rarely calculated. Moments of genuine surprise, creative risk, emotional exposure, all filtered through protective review before expression. Life becomes carefully edited footage rather than raw unfolding. There is no villain here, only a nervous system that learned its lesson thoroughly and continues applying it faithfully. The tragedy is subtle, competence so polished that the underlying tension remains socially rewarded and therefore rarely examined. Awareness does not immediately dissolve the pattern. It simply illuminates the mechanism, revealing effort where identity once stood unquestioned. And in that illumination, a quiet realization lingers that the grip once necessary may now be shaping the very fragility it tries to prevent.